Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and welcome to the BaileyWiki channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also make modular systems and scenes that you can use without any setup. And our releases for Foundry Virtual Tabletop are going to be the backdrop for today's video, where we're discussing weather in Foundry, specifically weather blocking and weather occlusion in Foundry. As you probably know, there is a lot of great ambiance you can add to a scene by using weather. Whether that is through the Foundry Ambiance setting in the scene configuration or using the FXMaster module and its great particle effect controls, you can elevate a scene immensely by adding some extra weather effects to really give the vibe you want to convey to your players. To take that to the next level, we're going to be focusing on the occlusion and blocking aspect, so that we can have the dreary, rainy city street that then once you step into the nice, warm, cozy inn, there is no more rain coming down on your head. Or when we are in the belly of a ship locked in the ice, the holes in the deck and the grates for the access to the cargo hold have the light and fog and snow filtering down from above to add that extra layer of immersion and really capture that ambiance and vibe that you have been giving your players through the weather. So we're first going to start off with some basics because there are a few tricky things and some considerations to keep in mind when it comes to blocking and occluding weather in Foundry. And then we're going to finish off with a couple of examples to showcase how these techniques work and apply in practice and exactly how those scenes look. If all that sounds good, let's dive right in. We're first going to start with the absolute basics here. There's two main ways that you can add weather to your scene. The first is going to be FXMaster. It's a fantastic module that's been around for a long time, and you've probably seen us leverage it in a variety of scenes and videos. It's a pretty powerful tool where you can add all sorts of different weather, like this fog effect, etc. And then the other method is using Foundry's built-in ambience setting here. So if you go to your scene configuration and then you go to the ambiance tab, there is the weather effect. And here you can set something like rainstorm and set that up. Once you have whatever weather effect you like, there are three big ways to suppress that weather so that you can have a nice dry area or an area that is not affected by those weather conditions. The first is going to be a drawing, and this is powered by FXMaster. So this is just a regular drawing, and then there is a toggle over here to the side for this mask particle effects. And just to demonstrate how you would create that, you can create a drawing of any style. It can also be a polygon. And then you simply right-click and click on the mask. A neat feature of the drawings is that you have the ability to go into your effect controls from FXMaster, and on this masquerade mask-looking icon, you can invert the particle effect mask, which is then going to have all of the effects instead only appear within those drawings. Our second method is going to be Foundry regions. As you can see, this area is completely dry, just like the weather blocking drawings that we have. And if we go into our region area, we can see we have a region here for weather block. To demonstrate how that is set up, I'll go ahead and create a new region, and we'll select the region, and then we can create any size or shape of region here. So I'll do this very strange polygon. And then we go into configure the region, and the behavior that we're going to add is the suppress weather behavior. Update the region and update the region behavior. We should now see when we leave that is working just fine. You can also choose to name this whatever you want, and just to demonstrate that you don't have to make multiple regions, it was only for demonstration purposes here. I have the first weather block region selected, and I can add any number of other shapes, and then those are also functioning as weather masking effects. One really big caveat with the region feature of suppressing weather is that it does not hook into FXMaster. So if you are using FXMaster to apply additional particle effects, for example, this fog that we had on at the beginning, you'll notice that these drawings obscure everything just fine, but these regions are only obscuring that rain effect from Core Foundry's Ambiance. So just keep that in mind if you do want to use regions. And for this reason, we kind of recommend that you stick with either drawings or our final feature, which is going to be tiles. Now, tiles in Foundry have this great tag on the overhead section for restricting weather. And this is going to be for things that are overhead tiles, not necessarily in the foreground specifically of the scene, but something that has an elevation that your players are going to go underneath. And typically these are going to have this fade option or something like that, like fade, radial, or vision, rather than the always visible option here. We're going to have the restrict weather selection on, and then we can see that when we have this token selected and we go beneath this tree, we can see that the fog and the rain are both occluded from this, and it matches the artwork and the transparency perfectly. So it's really awesome to be able to see like, oh, there are spots in the canopy where the rain comes through or the fog comes through. So it's very neat that way. And we can see that the same thing occurs over here. Now with the tiles, there's a few things to note. This tile is sitting at 10 and going up to infinity, and this tile is at 1000 going up to infinity. The reason for that is because if you configure your scene, and any scene that you're using levels on, like we are here, is going to have a foreground elevation set to 999. And you'll notice that this is at 1000, so it is above that foreground elevation. In fact, we have to use the foreground layer button to be able to select it. And we can see that the elevation is at 1000. So this is above the foreground level. And we can see that it is still restricting weather exactly the same as the other tile here. So tiles above the foreground elevation are going to function exactly like any other tile that is above the background elevation, which for this scene is set to 0. Now, what's great about the tiles is in addition to being able to see the weather effects on top of the tile and then disappearing below the tile, they also respect your elevation. So if we go up to 10 feet here and we would be above this tile here that is occluding weather, then it's not going to hide the weather for us, and also obviously not the tile. So basically, if the tile is hidden, then that is where the weather is going to be hidden as well. So if you're above where the tile would disappear, then it is not going to hide that weather for you. But again, since this is much higher, it's going to be there. Now, where things get a little tricky or confusing is when you involve the background elevation. As we mentioned earlier, the background elevation is set to 0. So if I set this token's elevation to -10, and we're now below, you'll notice that the drawings and the region are still occluding the weather, but those tiles that we had earlier are not anymore. And that's because tiles that are above the background elevation are going to be hidden if you are below the background elevation. There's no getting around this, that's just how it works. And things that are hidden will not occlude weather. That is different from being occluded themselves. And you'll see that we have another tree down here that has a elevation of -1, and this one does work as we expected with those other trees. So it's something to keep in mind if you are creating complex scenes and you have, say, lower elevations for a pit or something like that, where there might be a hole that goes all the way up, but if you have your background elevation set to somewhere in between the elevation that your tokens are going to be at when they're looking up through this hole and the actual tiles that are occluding the weather, then you're going to have some strange behavior, or it might not occlude weather like you expect. On the subject of elevation, another important aspect here is that the tiles are sensitive to elevation, but the regions and the drawings are not. If we go ahead and select this drawing and we set the elevation for this to be -10 and the top of this to be -1, we can't see it anymore with this token, but it is sure occluding the weather here. And then to demonstrate for the region, I'm going to go ahead and turn this fog off so it's a little bit clearer where the weather begins and ends. And then in the regions, even though we don't have a height on it, we can go ahead and specify that. We'll do the same thing of -10 to -1. So it's going to be below where our token is, but you'll see that the region is occluding weather all the way through. So that's an important note here when it comes to utilizing elevation. These are just always going to be on. They kind of cut through the entire scene, if you will, whereas these are acting as kind of true umbrellas until you get below the street level. That would be the background elevation. So now that we've discussed the basics here, let's go ahead and dive into a couple of demonstrations and some showcases of why you would want to leverage the tiles rather than the drawings or the regions. Our first demonstration here is just this city street from one of our previous patron releases for Foundry. And you can see this is a nice big street with a variety of buildings, and I've gone ahead and drawn in some weather occlusion drawings and regions here. And so if we step underneath this awning, it's nice and dry. And if we go into this inn, it is also nice and dry. However, we can see also that these roof tiles are revealed through the fog, and these roofs look like there's just no water hitting them, like they're above the rain or something like that, as opposed to these other roofs that are much more realistic in the fact that they have the rain over top of them. Now, of course, you could go in and draw suppression for all of these, so you could do that and then the roofs would match each other, but it still feels very strange to see the rain just not affecting the roofs at all when you can see the entirety of the roof. But we'd probably prefer that to having rain going on inside. So understandable if you want that look or you already have things set up. However, it's very easy to go ahead and switch everything over to using that weather blocking. If we hop over to this other version of the scene that I prepared here, all of these roofs are set up to restrict weather. And so we can see that we have the nice rain over top, which feels very realistic and immersive. But then once we step underneath the roofs, it's nice and dry, and it is pixel perfect to the actual shape and slope of the roof rather than being an approximation with the drawing tools or the region tools. And to set this up, it's very simple. Normally, when you drag out a tile with levels enabled, it's going to already have those restrictions in place. But in case you have a scene that you've already set up that doesn't have these features, we can go ahead and remove these drawings. And again, as you can see, these drawings try to follow the slope of the roof as much as possible, but it is still being hand drawn, and there is still going to be kind of rounding errors, if you will, with how Foundry likes to snap to certain coordinates. So we'll go ahead and delete our drawings and regions that are occluding the weather here. And for altering all of these roofs and setting them up so they restrict weather in this nice immersive way, we're going to use Mass Edit. I hit Shift F to search. Then I go into my overhead section, and then I want to change this occlusion mode to fade on the tile. Or if you know that you're using radial or vision, you can also select that. I happen to know that all of the tiles here that are meant to go away when you go between levels are set to fade, so I'm going to use that one. And then that's what you're going to search for. So we'll hit Search and Edit. And that's going to select and bring up all of these different tiles here. And so these are all the tiles that have fade set up, and we are going to select the Restricts Weather option here, and then go ahead and hit Apply. You can optionally also select this Restricts Light if you want to as well. The reason why we're using fade here is because all of the tiles that should disappear when you walk underneath them will be set to fade. If it's set to none always visible, then that tile's never going away anyway, so you'll never be beneath it to be able to see that it's blocking weather there. Now that we have all of that set up, we'll notice that if we step underneath, we now have that same great behavior of the tiles occluding the weather once we're underneath them. We can see it's raining on top of this tent, whereas before, when we were underneath the roof for the inn, the tent still didn't have rain on top of it, etc. But now we have that nice bit of immersion. So it's really easy and really great for making these scenes feel nice and detailed and keeping that immersion going with the amazing weather effects you can do in Foundry. Our last demonstration here is going to be on our recently renovated Galleon Icebound map. And with this, we have some holes in the deck, both one that's clearly from some damage and also these grates. And we have this set up to restrict the weather, and it ends up being a pretty amazing experience when you hop down to the lower levels. You can see that when we're down here, that these sections where there's the holes or the grates have the weather appearing from above. So we have this fog going through here. You could, of course, use any number of other weather effects to bring that immersion. It's just really nice and easy to see with the fog. And it adds this super cool effect of feeling like the light and the weather is actually filtering down from up above on you when you are down here in this hole. It's worth noting that when we step here, we can see this whole deck. And this area where the weather is not occluded is because the tile is completely not there, right? The weather comes through here because we don't have the tile at all. And if you wanted to have this set up so that you wouldn't see the tile appear, you would have to do something that would hide it. And as we mentioned earlier, hiding tiles is not the same as occluding tiles. And so that will mess with the ability of things to restrict weather. If I go to our main deck here and I select the tile, and we can see it's got the restrict light, all of those good things. And then if we go into levels and we do something like, say, show even when below, but we restrict the elevation difference to be, say, 5 feet, right? And when we close this up and we select our token, we'll notice that we don't see the upper deck anymore. Instead, we only see the gun deck that is above us. However, it's also not occluding in the same way that we had before. And so that is that real key difference between hiding a tile, using some kind of restriction like that, and actually occluding the tile. The same thing happens with changing the background elevation. So if we go ahead and turn this main deck back into its regular setup with levels so that it doesn't have the show even when below anymore. And just to verify, you can see it pops up when we're in just the right spot, but otherwise the occlusion is working perfectly and as intended. But then if we were to change the background elevation on the basics tab here and set it from -30, which is the lowest deck in here, to 0, we'll notice that it's no longer occluding either. And the reason why we have the occlusion here is because the deck below the main deck is the gun deck. And the gun deck here also restricts weather, but you'll notice that the gun deck is at a -10 to 0. So it is also below the background. So essentially when you go below the background, as we discussed in the basics, you're almost resetting what is going to be occluding weather effects between the token and either the background. So if you are below the background, it's only going to examine tiles that are also below the background for the purposes of occluding weather. If you are above the background, then it'll look at everything that is above the background for occluding weather. So that's the main reason why we have this set to a background elevation of -30. You could, of course, design this in a way that 0 is the lowest level, but we found that having the background at -30 is probably the easiest course of action here. If you're messing around with something like this, say, again, you've got a hole that spans from the background, or what you would traditionally consider to be your scene background, further down below, then you also want to adjust the background elevation in your scene configuration. It does not matter if you have a background image or not. It just matters what that background elevation is set to. Image or no, if you're using a tile or whatever, the scene is going to care about the background elevation for the purposes of occluding this. So if you're working with scenes that are more complicated like this one, where we have multiple layers of holes, because again, we've got this hole and this breach in the main deck. And if we go down to the gun deck, we'll see that the gun deck here has the holes from the grates and the hole from up above on the main deck. And then when we go all the way down, then we are able to see that there is the hole from the main deck and the grates from the main deck, but those are also informed and occluded by the hole from the gun deck, where you would raise cargo up and down from the gun deck down to the cargo hold. So keep that in mind whenever you're working with scenes like this, to make sure that you have the background elevation set at something that makes sense for what you're trying to use to occlude weather and where. That's going to conclude today's showcase and mini tutorial on weather and weather blocking in FoundryVTT. I know that when I was working on revamping Icebound Galleon scene, that there were a few confusing parts to me with occluding weather using multiple tiles, specifically that background elevation setting, and it was really tripping me up. So I hope that this video and comparing all the different methods that we have available has been useful to you. And if you are using weather and trying to make sure that it is blocked in an immersive and realistic way, that this has kind of demystified some of the confusion and made it more clear to you what choices you want to go with on each scene. This is, of course, a summary here rather than a super deep dive on all things weather. So if you are interested in learning more about that, or if you have questions about the topics we discussed already in this video, then leave us a comment and let us know what you want us to cover next. Again, this has been Zephyr with the BaileyWiki channel, and if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest content and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a video. And also consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, but you also gain access to all the modular systems and scenes that we've ever made, including those city streets and the premium version of the Icebound Galleon that we showcased today. Again, it's been Zephyr. Thank you so much for watching, happy gaming, and have a good one.